My text is taken from the first book of Kings, chapter 18 and verse 21. If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. The setting of the text is one of the most dramatic in the Old Testament. The leaders of the nation, including the king, had come together to make a great decision. It was a national emergency. Something had to be done. Elijah the prophet had called them to meet on Mount Carmel to settle no less a question than whom they should worship. It was a day of choice, a day of destiny. William Penn said that men must be governed by God or they will be ruled by tyrants. Here then was an ancient Hebrew prophet facing the very same issue and making his people face it with him. They all knew the history of their nation, how that their fathers had come out of the wilderness, out of bondage, into a new land as pioneers. Behind them were great leaders, Moses and Aaron and Joshua, men who had been led by God. They had set up not a democracy, but a theocracy, a state governed by God. The true God and his holy law had been written into the nation's constitution. The 10 Commandments had been to them a Bill of Rights and a declaration of dependence. The leaders of the young nation had taken God as their king and sovereign. They had ample reason to believe, having seen it worked out in their own history, that righteousness alone exalted a nation, and that that nation only was blessed whose God was the Lord. They had seen it work in the past. Their national history was proof. They had been taught that obedience to the laws of God was the only foundation for national greatness, liberty, and security. As long as the nation recognized God as supreme, it could stand. But something had been happening in the national life. The faith and the vision of the founding fathers had faded. Moral decay had set in. There was confusion in the minds of the people. They were beginning to forget the principles that had made them a nation. They had begun to love things more than principles. All around them, paganism flourished. Their neighbors were not without gods. They had gods, many of them, convenient gods. Gods that could be worshipped in ways that appealed to the lower nature. Materialism had a god, and his name was Baal. He offered to his devotees the things that human instincts crave. He was a god of the flesh. His priests encouraged the people to follow their natural inclinations. It was worship in indulgence, expressed in lust, and adored in selfishness. It had no inhibitions at all. It said, look after number one. Be yourself, be natural. Self-expression in natural instincts was its program. A good time for everyone, according to the flesh, was its goal. No wonder it grew in popularity. But still, Israel was confused. The inheritances of the past, the early teachings of their parents were not forgotten. Something of conscience was not yet drugged, and they were confused and uneasy. They took a little of Jehovah and a little of Baal. They became by degrees more and more broad-minded. Was it not a free country? Who wanted to be old-fashioned? So morality became a relative thing. The old absolutes were regarded as far too intolerant. The national moral standards were lowered. The worship of Baal and Jehovah got mixed somehow. It was hard to draw a line of distinction. Materialism and idealism were often confused. Now Elijah saw the danger. He saw what would happen to the nation when its moral fiber was weakened. He knew the end of confusion and indecision. He believed with all his heart that national ruin and disaster were inevitable if the nation forsook Jehovah and departed from its charter and constitution. So he summoned the leaders of the country together on this day of destiny. If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. It was a time now for men to take sides. There was no middle ground. They could not be neutral. They had to be on one side or on the other. They had to decide whether they and their nation would be governed by God or ruled by tyrants. Elijah saw that Israel as a nation could not go with God and Baal. It had to be God or Baal. He was a very fearless man, this Elijah. He faced the 450 prophets of Baal, the king and the nation's leaders. It had to be either or. They had to get on one side or on the other. You remember the dramatic test, the trial by fire? On the slopes of Carmel, with the copper sky above them and the parched, sun-baked plains of Jezreel at their feet, the people stood waiting. Elijah announced his proposed test. Let the matter be decided once for all. Let sacrifices be laid on the altar. Let him be God who would send down fire and consume the offerings. Let Baal have the advantage of priority. Let his priests have the first inning. Everything would be in their favor. The sun climbing to meridian would be at his height. There were 450 of them, and if they all prayed, that would be a lot of prayers. Let them call upon their God and let him answer if he could. And then began the weird pagan performance, with Elijah jibing at them with pointed sarcasm. Why, his words had blades in them. His taunts were razor sharp. Cry louder! Why don't you cry louder? He is a God you're crying to, isn't he? Well, he must be talking to somebody. He must be in the chase, or perhaps he's gone for a walk. Peradventure he's asleep. He may be taking a nap. Cry louder, wake him up. He taunted them all day long, until they were all at the point of exhaustion, hoarse with their shouting, wearied with their dancing, bleeding and wounded, since in their frenzy they had cut themselves, hoping that the sight of their own blood spurting from tired arms and legs might cause Baal to relent and answer. They carried on until evening. But there was neither voice, nor any to answer, nor any that regarded. Then Elijah, confident and unhurried, called the people closer, and going over to an abandoned, broken-down Jehovah altar, Elijah had them set upon it a sacrifice and drenched it 3 times with water. He made the test the more impressive by soaking the whole altar with water that ran into a trench dug all around it. And then his prayer to Jehovah, not ranting or foaming or shouting, and its answer in fire that consumed the sacrifice, licked up the water in the trench until the people looking on cried as they fell on their faces, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" Now I suggest to you that America needs prophets today, men and women too, because more than once in history a woman's voice has stated the issues clearly, who will set before the nation the essential choices. God, give us men. A time like this demands strong minds, great hearts, true faith, and ready hands. Men whom the lust of office does not kill. Men whom the spoils of office cannot buy. Men who possess opinions and a will. Men who have honor. Men who will not lie. Men who can stand before a demagogue and damn his treacherous flatteries without winking. Tall men sun-crowned, who live above the fog in public duty and in private thinking. For while the rabble with their thumb-worn creeds, their large professions, and their little deeds mingle in selfish strife, lo, freedom weeps. Wrong rules the land, and waiting justice sleeps.